Hi, everybody. We're back. This is Gina Tognoni.
And this is Ashley Crane.
And we have a very, very special guest today. We are so happy to welcome him. John McAleavey is here with us. He is the host of his own podcast called The Quadcast. He began that in 2020. And he is building an audience, as he says, 2 ears at a time, with a wonderful sense of humor, if I might add. So I just have to say, John, we are so happy to have you. But I am loving your spirit. You and I met just recently through your wonderful sister, Susie, who I am so grateful for, introduced us. Thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. It's nice to be, as I've been telling my friends, I'm going to be on the other side of the microphone for a chance. Usually it's me asking the questions, but this is a nice opportunity to put the shoe on the other foot, if you will.
Absolutely. John is a survivor and thriver of spinal cord injury. He has been in this world for a while with his injury, and I want him to, in his own words, set the stage, kind of as he even does with his guests, kind of life before your injury and then life after. But
Sure.
Why don't you start with where you're from, what it was like growing up? Did you grow up in a Catholic home? Just tell us a little bit about where you're from.
I did, yeah. I like to tell people that I grew up on the mean streets of Shorthills, New Jersey.
Which is the
My
exact
goodness.
opposite.
Right, exactly the exact opposite. And I recall growing up, church was always something we did on a Sunday. It was something that we got ourselves dressed, we got ready to go, and we were members at St. Rose of Lima in Short Hills. And I can recall once or twice, maybe as a youngster, getting pulled out in the middle of Mass for maybe misbehaving a little bit. And I've learned a lesson in that respect. You know, little kids get a little rambunctious. But yeah, we went to St. Rose. I was an altar boy. I enjoyed doing that. And I was also the president of our youth group my senior year in high school, where we met once a week. And it was a nice way to interact with other folks my age that were, living in their faith. It was also nice to get out of the house for an hour or so on a weeknight, especially as spring rolled around, senior year in high school. Nobody wants to be home. But we did some really fun things. We had a retreat. We went away for a weekend. We also would go to the beach together. There was a nun, Sister Winifred, she ran the whole thing, and Father Jerry Greaves was also a part of it. And it was really a nice atmosphere. It brought people from all areas of high school. There were athletes there. There were some of the, smarter folks that weren't, necessarily in the in crowd or at the front table in the cafeteria, if you will. And so it was a nice mix of people, and we all came together, and it was a really nice way to stay in our faith and learn a little bit more about it.
So, John, your faith was modeled at home, so to speak, with your parents and siblings?
Yes. Yeah, as I said, we were Sunday churchgoers, and we were also, we made sure that it was, we weren't holy rollers, but we lived our faith. I had two great role models. Mom and Dad were good people, and my father was an altar boy growing up in Newark, and my mom and her Italian family, they were always churchgoers. And so it was always just a part of who we were. If Sunday rolled around, we were going to be at Mass. So it was ingrained in us, myself and my sister Susan. While we went to a public high school, Milburn High School, we each chose a Catholic college. Susan went to Boston College, and I didn't get in there. So I went to Providence College, and had 4 wonderful years there. And so it was something that we pursued further. After high school, we were a part of a Catholic college.
Right. And you also, as a youth, you very interested in sports, right? That started at a young age. It was, you just were fanatic about basketball?
Yeah, I was a big sports guy. If you were to ask me back in the day, what's your favorite sport? I'd say, well, tell me what time of year is it? And then I'll tell you, if it was in the spring and summer, it was baseball. And then in the winter, it was basketball. And in the fall, it was football. And I knew at an early age that, I wasn't going to make a living playing sports as much as I would have liked to have done that. And so I decided to see if I could find a profession that would allow me to earn some money while being in and around sports. And that's when I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in journalism, sports communications, whether it was either being at the games, announcing the games, talking about the games. Just, I thought, boy, if I could get paid for watching sports, I mean, this is like free money. I mean, come on, let's do that. And so in college, I did a 3-year internship at the ABC TV affiliate in Providence, Rhode Island. I worked for the sports director there, and he gave me the opportunity to go to different locker rooms. I was in the Boston Red Sox locker room. I was in the New England Patriots. I was at all of the Providence basketball games, and I really learned, really hands-on training better than, a lot of students who were just getting, schoolwork training. I was getting real life hands-on training. And so that was what was in front of me. At least that was the plan until, life had other ideas.
Okay. So, we talk about, well, you talk a lot about in your podcast, the life-altering event, right? That moment in time when your life changed forever. Set the stage. What time of year was it? Where were you?
Yeah.
Bring us through that.
I was working for Nabisco at the time. It was a job that I was working as a sales representative. It was in between TV things. Right out of college, I got a great job working at an organization called Sports News Network, SNN, and it was down in Arlington, Virginia, and it was my dream job. I was working 3 in the afternoon to about 2 in the morning, and I was editing highlights and writing scripts and really learning a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, the company was spending money like drunken sailors, and they went bankrupt like a year into it. So it was like, all right, here's your dream job. Now you're out on your heels. And so I was working for Nabisco while I was interviewing for other TV things. And so it was a really warm, sunny day, and I worked a full day. I came home and I went out for a run that night around the track and in downtown Millburn. And little did I know it was going to be the last time I would ever run. I had dinner, went to bed, and in the middle of the night, I woke up. I wasn't feeling well. I lived at home. I was still at home at the time, living in the basement. And I just recall feeling off. And I thought, I better go upstairs and get my parents and maybe go up to the emergency room and find out what's going on. And I remember walking towards the stairs and feeling faint. So I got close to the floor. And then the next thing I remember is that I was wiping some drips of blood away from my eye. I must have passed out and hit the floor. And then from there, I don't recall walking up the stairs, and I don't recall falling down the stairs. But I had made it all the way to the top because there were drips of blood that made it up there. And then I'm awakened at the bottom of the stairs with my head in the rug and my feet pointed back up the stairwell. And I was completely paralyzed from head to toe. And I just felt nothingness. It was just complete numbness. And from there, I heard my dad coming down the stairs, and I just remember I was only able to whisper because I had hit my spinal cord so high that my voice was affected. I could just whisper. I remember telling him, don't move me, because, you can do more damage where people are in that sort of a state. And then from there, it was a whole new world was about to begin. The first aid squad came, and they were able to get me up to Overlook Hospital. And from there, I tell people it was like a new birth date where I was 24 years old at the time of the injury. And then I became, newborn for a brand new life, and one that I wasn't expecting, one that I wasn't necessarily looking for, but such is life, as they like to say, and you have to move on and adapt. And that was the story that happened. And I would learn that I had injured my spinal cord at the cervical level, which is really high. It's at the C3-4 level. So if you were to look at me and I were to turn around, it would be at the back of my hairline. So it's very, very high. And had it been a complete injury, I would be on a ventilator to this day because my lungs would have been involved. But luckily for me, it was an incomplete injury, but what came along with it is something called central cord syndrome. And believe me, I didn't know anything about spinal cords until I banged mine up. But the central portion of your cord is responsible for your upper body, your arms, hands, and fingers, fine motor. And what I had done as a result of the fall was really just really crushed the inner portion of the cord. And so the doctors told me early on, they said, John, we think you're going to walk. We're pretty sure you're going to walk, but you'll really have limited to no use of your upper body. And so to think of yourself as an upside down para. Paraplegics have no use of their legs, but their upper bodies work fine. So I was sort of an upside down. So for years, I've been telling people that I can get up and walk wherever I want to go. I just can't do a thing once I get there. because I really have limited to no use. And they were spot on. I mean, they had hit it right on the head, to tell you the truth.
Do you continue to do PT to develop any of that upper body strength, or how do you address that?
Yeah, I do. I do. In fact, I just started up for another round. But at this point, what we're trying to do is, nobody's getting any younger. So we're just getting a little bit older. And I found out the old saying, move it or lose it, is really, really true. When COVID rolled around, a lot of us in the spinal cord injured community couldn't get out to do therapy and couldn't get to see their doctors and whatnot. So we really just got severely atrophied. And so our bodies, we lost muscle mass, and it's gotten harder for me to walk these days. And so now I think it's just sort of preventive maintenance. I'm trying to hold on to what I still have so that moving forward, I'll be able to stay up and still walk and not have, the issues with that. So yeah, we try to keep ourselves in the best shape until we always say, like, until that magic bullet rolls around that, they can make us all better again. So we have to be in shape for the next great invention. There's a couple of good things that are out there now that have us all heartened.
You know, take us through those first months. And were you at Kessler right away?
Yeah, I was at Overlook Hospital for probably 3 months or so. And, going back all those years, it's over 33 years ago now, the stays were a lot longer. And then so I went from Overlook to Kessler, where I was an inpatient at Kessler for almost 4 months. And now, I know we'll get into this later, but I work as the peer mentoring coordinator at Kessler. And I have to tell you, it's disconcerting because people that are coming to us now as inpatients, I mean, they're there for 4 weeks and they're sent home. I mean, I don't know how they adjust to it and their families adjust to it. It's just, to me, it has to do with the insurance and they want to get them in and out and move them on. And I don't know how they do it. I mean, it took me 4 months, and even that didn't seem like long enough. And so, yeah, I went from Overlook to Kessler. And then, so I was out of the house for a good 7, almost 8 months. It was, you start to think the old saying, be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. I mean, I just wanted to go home and
Mhm,
sleep in my bed and,
mhm.
see my house and all of those little creature comforts that you lose when you have, a life-changing incident happens to you.
You mentioned to me when we spoke, the aides and the therapists that were there for you, that they were just angels. A chaplain in particular
Yeah.
was very instrumental in your mindset. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, I know it was early on. I was in Overlook, and what was nice is that the room that I was in was a 2-bedroom. There was a double, but they never put anybody else in there with me. It was just me in the bed close to the window. And a funny story, I used to have a couple of friends. Well, I had a ton of friends that came to visit me, but 2 in particular. One was sort of my day guy, and then another one would come at nighttime. But there were opportunities where, there was a bed there. So my friend that was there in the day would hop in the bed and we would watch TV shows to try and take my mind off of what had just happened to me. So I remember one day, one of the nurses that came in, she was new to the room. She didn't know, had never met me before. So she went over to him and started to take his vital signs. And we said, no, 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 it's me. I'm over here in the corner, So we laughed about that. Yeah. But one day in particular, there was a chaplain at Overlook. His name was Father Afinoso, I believe was his name. And he came in and he sort of asked everybody to leave the room. And he came over to the bed and he said, John, you're not going to realize this, but there's like a conga line of people in the hallway that are here to see you. It's your friends, it's your neighbors, it's coworkers and family. And he said, what has happened to you is going to change some of their lives. And some of them will see how you're dealing with this and how you're living with this. And it's going to bring them back to the faith. And they're going to go to church, and maybe they're there to say some prayers for you and for your family. And some of them will maybe discover themselves again and their religion again and their faith again. And I thought, that's pretty profound. I wish, however, it could have been overseeing me at ShopRite or at the Milburn Deli. I wish it wouldn't have had to happen in this sort of a case, but it was pretty profound, and it was pretty heavy, I thought, at the time. And I think it did happen for some of them.
That's very encouraging. What about the work ethic? Did you have any work ethic that came from your journalism, that came from your hard work before the spinal cord injury that you were able to use that pushed you through in recovery?
I think so. I think, I had, as I mentioned earlier, I had great role models in both my parents, mom and dad. I know my dad was a great worker, and mom also was a teacher for a number of years. And I also had a sister who was not only a great athlete and a great person, but she was out and working. And then what happens is when you have something like that happen to you, you sort of, have to get your sea legs under you, if you will, and sort of figure out like, okay, we took a hit here and we have to sort of figure out what still works for us. I remember one of my OTs on the first day, my occupational therapist told me, she said, John, at this point, it might sound hard to you, but you can't dwell on what does not work for you anymore. You have to accentuate what still does. And I like to say for me now, it's my big mouth. And that's why I record my podcasts, and hopefully I'm working with a voiceover coach to try and get into some voice acting and commercial work and narration and that type of thing. But you really have to find what still goes for you. I remember sometimes laying in the bed and, if my toe would wiggle or if my knee would move, I would move it 1,000 times to see if it would generate more to go. And so you sort of find out what still goes with for you, and you work with that in therapy. And I did that. That was really what I did in therapy. And, it was eye-opening. I'd never been around disabled people really in my life. And then here I am laying on a mat, and there's people who have had strokes and amputees and other spinal cord people, and they're all in the same room trying to pick up the pieces of what's going on with their lives. And so we sort of pushed each other and fed off of each other. And I think that was really sort of where the work ethic came in. Plus, being an athlete for all those years, you want to try and be the best. I mean, if one day I did so many reps of something, then I wanted to do 2 more the next day, or I wanted to do,
Mhm.
if my time in, moving around the mat was, 3 minutes, I wanted to beat that. I wanted to do 2:55 or 2:50. And I remember it got me into trouble sometimes because they would say, John, stop being so hard on yourself. And I said, well, I'm a competitor. I want to have one more point than you do. And so I think that sort of pushed me.
Great. In your podcast, you discuss with your guests often about the mental floss. I thought that was so clever that you look at it like mental floss, things that would clear your head. What were some of those things?
I think it was that my friends never left me behind. And on any given, Sunday, I was up. My stay started in November of 1992. And so that was the height of the NFL season and college football. And I remember, being 24 at the time, all of my friends were the same age. And there was a main TV room at Kessler. They called it it was in the rotunda, and we had a TV there. So there would be like 30 guys that would take time out of their day. A lot of them were bussing in from the city. They were just starting out in their lives working in the city, and they would come in, and, I would be sitting in there in my wheelchair, and then everybody would be in pulling up chairs and, yelling at the TV, and all the other patients would come out, and it became like a bit of a family atmosphere. And I think the fact that they, wanted me to still be with them as much as I could be was something that really kept my mind from wandering and going down the rabbit hole. When I counsel people today as a peer mentor, I say, you don't want to go down that rabbit hole, because if you do and you start with the woe is me and the feeling sorry for yourself, you could be in there all day long, and it's a dark, lonely place. So anything that you can find to keep you away from that and take your mind off of the situation as much. And so I think that those situations were important for me, at least early on.
There's always a running theme in our podcast about community. Community seems to always be the thing that really brings people back together. I think that's cool that you had friends that refused to leave you behind and they came alongside you for this journey. And what a blessing that is.
Yes, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say, I mentioned that I was 24 at the time, and a lot of the therapists were also, in that age range, like 24, 25, 26. And those fields were mostly young women. And so my friends used to say, oh, we're going to go up and visit John. He's staying at a sorority house. And I said, oh, they said, yeah, Kessler's like a big sorority. So we're going to go visit John and see him and, meet some of the ladies that are working with him. So we got a kick out of that. That was another part of why they were coming up. I found out later.
Well, you had all this support, and then, I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but you found yourself, you created a podcast on your own in 2020. So you started a podcast when, number one, the whole world was blowing up.
Mm.
You started a podcast when not everyone was doing it. And so kudos to you. And I must say, I listened to a few episodes on the Quadcast, and you are phenomenal. just a fabulous host, and your sound, your cadence is absolutely beautiful. You can tell that you have studied on some level, or if it feels natural, really, to listen to you. So you're very good at what you do. Tell us about some standout guests that really inspired you. And we mentioned Marianne. We talked about Marianne, and we also talked about Joe Fabio.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about those two guests that you had on your show.
Sure. Well, thank you for the kind words on the podcast. Yeah, I appreciate that. I founded it in the middle of COVID, as you mentioned. I was looking to pass some time and delve back into my communications background. And so I bought a laptop computer and a microphone and really didn't know what I was doing and put this together. It was sort of a way for me to, as I said, get my voice back out there, but also to, as a blueprint for fellow spinal cord injured folks, to let them know that while these injuries are devastating and they're awful and they're, lifelong and they change everything, it's not the end of the world. There's still a light at the end of the tunnel. And so when I record my shows, that's the genesis of where it came from, and to sort of be, as I mentioned, a blueprint. So I look for people who have had awful things happen to them and have picked up the pieces and gone on to do amazing things. I've had individuals who were on Shark Tank and made a lot of money. They've invented businesses. I had a gentleman who was on American Idol and finished like in the top 10 of American Idol series. I had a gentleman who played football for the Detroit Lions who was injured on the field, opening up holes for Barry Sanders back in the 80s. He joined me. I had a gal who was the first ever Tony Award winning actress. She won an award in New York City, and she came on with me. She was a great guest. She's a Jersey girl, and her name escapes me right now, but she was on with me. And I've had motivational speakers. As I said, I had the guy who was on American Idol. And yeah, I just sort of reach out for people who are really doing cool things. And a lot of them want to listen. Everybody wants to hear themselves talk, in some form or fashion. And what's the other saying? Everybody's got a story, right? And
Mhm.
some people are interested in telling theirs. And if it can be beneficial to other people, then I'm all for it. And so that's basically how I go about looking for people to talk to.
That's what we
Very
have in
cool.
common. We kind of approach it the same way. Anybody who wants to talk about, their faith and,
Yeah,
where it all started or where it went wrong or anything
right.
like that. Yeah. That's great.
It's a cool thing.
Cool.
And you mentioned two folks, Marianne. It was a friend of mine who is a very spiritual person, and she has written books. She teaches courses, and she's still learning more and more each and every day. She became sort of like the spiritual advisor on the wing while she was still an inpatient at Kessler, which is wild. And so she has been doing that for a long time. And my friend Joe Fabio was someone that was injured probably about a year ahead of me. He was injured, believe it or not, on a cruise ship. One thing I didn't know about cruise ships is that when they come into port to get people to go off and go into the town or whatever, they drain the pool to clean it out. And he didn't know that either. And he dove into a pool that was sort of half empty. And so he's a pretty high quad, and he's a complete injury. So he's in a power chair forever. And he just wasn't having it. He went down the rabbit hole and was just depressed and angry, and he wore it on his sleeve. I mean, he would tell people he didn't want to be here anymore, and he could push him down the hill, and he just didn't want to be around. And I remember he was a nice guy aside from that. Like, he was a sports guy. He was around my age, so we had a lot in common. So we would talk, and then I can remember some of the girls would come over and say, "Get John away from him. Get him away before he taints John and makes him think that, this is the end of the world and life is not going to be what it was." And, I lost track of Joe after I had graduated from Kessler. And then, strangely enough, I bumped into him about 10 years later, and Joe was married, and Joe had a child, and he was doing some peer mentoring of his own. So he had sort of come to grips with everything and had come out of the hole, and he's now a voice of reason, and he talks to people a lot like I do. And it was an amazing turnaround. I was happy for him. I was proud of him.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of hear in this going from that resistance, why me, to almost a consent and saying, okay, this
Uh-huh.
is me. I accept it to the best of my ability.
Uh-huh.
And I am searching for that hope. And that hope is in your heart at that moment. And it's imperative that you keep it there because that keeps you moving forward in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to. As I say, people will say, how did you, accept this? And I like to say, I really haven't accepted what happened to me. And I'm still, sure, I'm angry. I mean, I had a whole life planned out for myself and I didn't expect it to take this turn. And so there's a part of me that's still, fuming about all of that. And you keep that down and you keep that to underneath everything, because at that point, like I mentioned earlier, you sort of pick up the pieces and you take an inventory of what still works and you go with that, because as I said, the hole is there, the rabbit hole is there if you want to go down it. But I always said, if hiding in the corner and crying and being angry would make me better physically, then find me a spot. Now I'll jump right in there with you, but it doesn't make you physically better. It doesn't make your situation better. It just adds, the mental aspect, the mental anguish to the physical problems that you have. And so I've just chosen not to do that. I like to say I'm someone who wakes up on the sunny side of the street and I try to put a smile on my face, even though it ain't easy.
Mhm.
Like we like to say, we make it look easy, but it certainly isn't when you see folks that are in my position. It's tough. And it's every day. We say our lives are almost like that movie Groundhog's Day, where you wake up and everything you do the same way every day. And you just have to accept that and move on.
Let's get to God winks that you've experienced in your life. And like many other guests, you've said you've had several, all various type of things. And you couldn't
Uh-huh.
necessarily name a few, but you did mention your sweet little doggy Yokin,
Mm.
how he was a God wink. Share with us how he kind of came into your life and how you felt he was sent by God.
Yeah, yeah. Something that I had found out really pretty early on after my injury, way back in the 90s, was that there were such things as service dogs. And I didn't know that. I thought that maybe they were just for, the seeing eye, for the blind. I used to see them in Morristown and I would see them around town with folks trying to navigate the streets and crosswalks and whatnot. But they told me, they said, John, there's a high demand for these dogs. So if you want one, you should really put your name in the hat, because it takes a long time. The process is long and arduous and you should really get involved. And of course, I was a procrastinator. It took me, 27, 28 years to get around to doing it. And another thing is, when I was growing up, I was a severe asthmatic and I couldn't be around dogs, the dander and the hair. And I would start sneezing and coughing and my eyes would run. And so I really couldn't be around them. And luckily I had outgrown that situation. And so there's an organization called Canine Companions for Independence. They dropped the for independence now. It's just Canine Companions. Their website is canine.org. They're based in Santa Rosa, California. And the dogs are all born and bred there. They stay for about 8 weeks. And then they're sent around the country to families and individuals that are referred to as puppy raisers, and they will stay with them for a year and a half. And they take them out into public, into loud places to get them acclimated to, commotions and people, and to keep their focus sharp. They teach them their sits and downs, and they walk them, and they just sort of get them prepared. And then after the year and a half, they have to turn them back into the organization, which is really hard because they've grown accustomed to and fallen in love with these adorable, amazing animals. After that year and a half, they go back to different campuses around the country that CC has. And so my guy, Yokin, he had his training. He was on a horse farm in Arlington, Virginia, and he just was running with horses all day long and swimming in a lake that they had there. So he was like a pig, and you know what? He loved all of that. So from there, Yokin went to the Northeast region, which is in Medford, Long Island, where he went for 9 months of then heavy duty training. And I was on the waiting list. It took about 5 years to get Yokin from the initial email that I sent out. They're very, very selective. So you send an initial email and then you get one back that says, thank you for your interest, but this is because there's so few dogs and so many people. This is probably the end of our conversation, but thank you for reaching out. And then a week or two later, I got another email that said, could you please fill out these forms, have your doctor fill them out? And then with the caveat that this is probably the end of the road and, the high demand. And so then I filled out the forms. I got another email. They said they wanted to do a phone call. And then again, you're probably the end of the road. And then I made it through that hoop, and then they wanted me to go out to Medford. So my sister and I took a ride out there right before COVID, the summer before COVID, for them to meet me and to see what my limitations were. And then COVID rolled around and everything went on the back burner. And then in 2021, they called me again and said, we're going to open the process again. And we'd love to have you come out. We think we have a dog for you. And after a 2-week training session, which was amazing, I was the only person that could walk. Everybody was wheelchair bound. They either had cerebral palsy or MS or other spinal cord injured. It was a great group. There was only 6 of us. We grew really close. And it's amazing. These dogs, they don't see the disability. They don't see the wheelchair. They just see the human. They feel the love. And at the end of the day, they're looking for treats. And if someone in a wheelchair has a bag full of treats, they're going to be all over you. And so I came home with Jochen, and it was life-changing. You know, I had never had a dog before. So I'd like to tell people, you know, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but you can teach an old man new tricks. And so I'm living proof of that. And one of the reasons that I think I mentioned to you about how God came into that was that when we would do training for different commands, the way you do it is you would give the command, and then if the dog does it right, then you reach in your bag and you give them a treat. And as I told you off the top, my hands don't work. So when Jochen would do something right, I would reach in the bag and I would look in the bag and I would drop it. I couldn't get them. And I would look down and he would be looking up at me with his brown eyes as if to say, don't worry. You know, I know you're going to get it to me. Don't worry about it. And I just thought, oh my gosh, there's something going on here. And it was tough because, as I said, I couldn't pick the things up. And after a while, it took a little while, but I finally got the treat and he would get it. He was a good boy and he learned all this stuff, but we had sort of that give and take because it wasn't going to be right away. He wasn't going to get his treat right away. It was going to take a little while. So I think he learned early on that, all right, it might be a little delayed gratification here, but it's going to happen at some point. And I think I thought, wow, there's something going on here. These eyes are looking up at me and there's little something more in here than that.
And what's dog spelled backwards?
Yeah, they told me that.
G-O-D.
Yeah, that's right.
Boy, every episode, you know, there's always something, and that was it. That's so
That was it.
beautiful.
Yeah.
That was it.
That was it. And I like
It's so
to,
beautiful.
sometimes when I finish up with my shows, I'll have him bark in the background. And just to let everybody know, I tell them, I said, well, for those of you that don't speak Golden Lab mix, what he said was, I hope you enjoyed this episode and tune in next week. And,
Yeah.
for your next one, I have a little fun with that. So I put yolks on there. His name is interesting. It's a combination. There was a husband and wife who were big benefactors to the Canine Companions family. They gave a lot of money over the years. The wife's name was Yolanda, and the husband was Ken. And unfortunately, Yolanda had been diagnosed with breast cancer back in, I think, 2018. She passed in 2020. And they gave the family an opportunity to name one of the dogs because they do come with a name. You can't pick the name because they're 2.5 when we get them. So initially he was just going to be Yo, but they said, the husband's still alive, Ken. So we'll put that on the end of it. And that's how Jochen came together.
It's so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the angels in your life. I know your sister, who actually I've met in the last few years. She is a tremendous person, an incredible light. You're very lucky to have her, Susie. She has been an angel to you, right? Your own personal God wink every day, right? She's been a caretaker. And how has God brought people into your life? I mean, have you sensed that people have just come into your life and filled certain voids?
Yeah. I remember hearing, I forget where it was, what was a homily one time or something. I remember a priest saying, take a look around. Each and every day you should look around because he's out there, not to get all holy roller and hokey, but, there's been certain times in my life where I know I take Jochen for a walk around the neighborhood. And we were going one day and there was a gentleman riding a bike. He was an older guy and he stopped and he introduced himself and he said, do you need anything? Can I help you with anything? And he just had this twinkle in his eye and a smile. He said, I hope to see you around the neighborhood again. And I thought, that was weird. I've never seen him before. And I thought, hey, look who that is stopping by to say hello. And there was another instance where I was out with Jochen. It was in front of the house, and I have my phone with me. I usually listen to music, and on this day, I had the Hallow app, which is something that I listen to that religiously. I like to hear the daily reflections a man named Jeff Cavins, who's amazing. I listen to him each day. So I had that on in the background, and I heard these little pitter patter of little feet coming up behind me. And I stopped, and there was a little boy. He was on a little scooter. He must have been, 5 or 6. And I thought, first of all, what are you doing out here by yourself? And then I heard behind me, I heard his grandmother was coming up behind him. But he said, "Is that Jesus?" And I thought, wow, he heard the Hallow app and he heard this guy talking. And I thought, there's another instance of, wow, why would he be saying that? Or how would he know that? And it made me think that maybe he was hearing that at home. Maybe his family is religious and they teach him at home, and he picks up on that. And then also being someone who was disabled, and, I need help with a lot of different things. And I remember I was at work and I was getting Yokin out of the car, and I dropped my keys, and I thought, oh God, because I can't pick them up. And then I just heard out of the background, "Hey, do you need help with that?" There was somebody coming up behind me, and I thought, somebody put somebody there to help me out. There's a lot going on here. So there's instances like that I like to try and look for somebody that, that could be, a higher power, or maybe somebody there to help you out. And it's something that I try to look for each and every day.
And this blows me away. You were a basketball coach
Yeah.
after the injury from the chair. How long did you do that, John?
Yeah, I coached for 22 years in Millburn, and my friend was starting to do it, and he called me up. It was soon after my accident, and I said, "How am I going to coach basketball? Not only can I not dribble a ball anymore, I can't even hold a basketball. And for me to walk across the court, it's not easy, and it's not always pretty. I don't walk like everybody. I sort of shuffle my feet and all. I thought the kids are going to give me, what, behind my back." And really, that first day, I just went and I monitored the whole situation. I really didn't do anything. And then with each and every day that went by, I told you before that I'm that competitor that wants to beat you by one more point. I started to talk a little more, and I would watch games, and I would tape things and put some plays in. And the kids didn't see it after a while. And then after that first year, my friend said, "Hey, listen, I'm getting, relocated. So you're the guy. You're moving over a seat." So I went from being the assistant coach to being the head coach. And, after I would pick my team, I would sit them all down, that first practice, and I would tell them exactly what happened to me. And I would tell them that, at this point, I can't run anymore. I can't jump anymore. I can't shoot anymore. And so in a way, I'm going to be living through you guys. You're going to be my feet. You're going to be my hands. You're going to be my, running up and down the court. And I want to win just as much as the coach who's able-bodied from the next town over that we have to play. And we're going to run some plays that some other teams don't have. And we're just going to go get them. And we had a lot of success. I mean, we won a championship. Millburn had never won a championship at the 8th grade level, and we won that. We did that, and we had a lot of success over the years. We won a lot of games, and it sort of filled that void for me, being the jock and the athlete and the exerciser that I couldn't do anymore. It really filled that hole that became big when I had my injury, and I couldn't compete any longer. In, men's leagues, I played some men's softball back in the day, and I couldn't do that anymore. And I thought, how am I going to fill this Jones that I have to compete and to get out there? And coaching basketball was absolutely a godsend for me.
I would love to hear more about your work as a peer mentor.
For many moons after all of this, you always hear that God has a purpose for you, and he's got, he can count every hair on your head. And, I'm losing some of mine. I hope he's catching the ones that are falling to the ground or in the drain in the shower. But yeah, and I thought, what is my purpose? Like, well, what am I really doing here each and every day? And I thought, maybe the purpose is to try and help other people who are going through agony. And, these injuries don't only affect the person that's in the bed and in the therapy room, and it affects parents and siblings and neighbors and, coworkers. And so, I always say that I can see the people who are going through it, because they all have that same look on their face. Like, hey, can somebody get the license plate of the tractor trailer that just ran over our world and affected everybody? And so that's sort of the mindset that I like to go into the room and sort of let them know that, I've been here and I've gone through all of this, and I don't want to sugarcoat things and tell you that everything's going to be great and your life is going to be beach balls and sunshine. But it's also not going to be the end of the world unless you want it to be, unless you choose for it to be that way. And another thing that I learned on one of those first days, my OT told me that there's John, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And there was maybe certain things that, you did something for all those years a certain way, and now you're going to have to learn to do it a different way. And it might not be easy and it might not be pretty, but if you want to be as independent as possible, you'll have to learn to do things that different way. And so I like to sort of go in and put that face on what the situation is. And I'm hoping that it's a nice icebreaker now when I can walk in with a four-legged friend who just lightens all the atmosphere. I mean, people, sometimes you go in the room and they're either crying or they're, despondent, and they say, "Oh my gosh, there's a dog in the hospital here. What is this dog doing here?" And he gets up on the bed and he gives him kisses, and it just sort of breaks the ice. And so that's sort of my entrance into the room, and just to try and help the process, because these people they're on the ground floor of what's going to be the rest of their lives. And so if I can help in any way, shape, or form, that's sort of what I think maybe my purpose is nowadays.
It's nice that Jochen is doing, just as much work as you are helping out.
He absolutely is, yeah. And if I could go back to one thing, you were talking about the God winks and how you see him prepared in your life. And we mentioned before about my sister, but I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you. I know Gina, Susan, what an amazing, person she is. And she has a family of her own. She's got two wonderful kids, my niece and nephew, and a great husband. And she has a dog of her own, Bogey, who is now here with us. And plus there's my mom here too, who's in her mid 80s, and she has needs. And Susan is up at the crack of dawn. She's at the 7:00 mass. She's comes home sometimes with communion for us, which is great. She's an extraordinary minister. She's the executive director of a business and a company, and she just is all in with us on top of it all. And you can never say thank you enough. I know she'll always say, you don't have to say thank you, but it's when you're in this position and you're so dependent on somebody else to help you, you don't really know how to get it out there. But she's just remarkable, and I hope she knows how much Mom and I respect her and love her, and really we don't know where we'd be without her. It's really an amazing thing, and it's a daily God wink, if you will.
And if you meet Susan, her spirit is bright like yours, but she never seems drained. She never seems exasperated. She is just such a giver. So you can imagine how full she is. And she just reflects God
Yeah.
to, the best in the person that she's opposite. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I can see what a blessing.
Yeah,
she is.
she's been a driving force also with me over the years. You can do it. You can still do this. Come on, get out there. You can do it. My dad was the original. We used to call him the coach. He was the best. My dad was an amazing guy. I remember some of my friends would tell me that when I was at Overlook, when it initially happened, and they would come up to visit, he would tell them before they went in the room, "Okay, nothing negative, nothing down. We're all positive. When you go in there, pump them up. Let's go." You take on the team takes on the character of the coach. And so Susan picked up a lot of that, when Dad passed. And so you have those people in your corner that are pushing you forward. I like to say there's nothing in this world like family and old friends. And the older I get, it's without a doubt, it's so true.
In a world where when we desperately need hope, and we know that that is the very buoy that keeps us up no matter our circumstances. If you were to share what has given you hope, what is that?
Oh, I would have to say that, it's something that I learned all those years ago, is that when I mentioned to you that I would be in the gym with other people, and as bad as my situation was, and we always like to say, as bad as whatever your situation is, someone's always got it worse. And look around the room and there'd be people with the ventilator on. They couldn't breathe on their own. And it was like, oh my gosh, I don't know whether I could do that. Like Chris Reeve, he had nothing. He couldn't move anything. And I think I couldn't have lived a life like that. It would have been way, way too much. And so the hope is that, you pick up the pieces with what you have, and you try to surround yourself with as many positive and upbeat people and friends and family that you have, and that you hope that you can make a difference in some form or fashion. I mean, I might not be that guy on ESPN that I thought I was going to be and making $1 zillion a year on Wall Street or whatever, but I like to think that the hope is that you can make your imprint, on other people, and have have something that you can hang your hat on at the end of the day. You get your good name and that you've had something terrible happen to you, but you didn't let it define who you were. Um, and, uh, and you moved on. And I think that would probably be what hope is for me.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Your strength is amazing, John. I don't know if you know it, but you are beautiful to listen to and you are inspiring because you're showing us that no matter the circumstance, there's a way through, moving through any kind of circumstance and any kind. We thank you so much. And thanks for the work you're doing on your podcast because you're helping that whole community, the whole spinal cord injury community, people that have been disabled in some way.
Hmm.
You're really doing your part there and you're so good.
Well, thank you for the kind words. What I say at my shows, while they're mainly for and about folks like me who've had their lives affected by a spinal cord injury, they're really for anyone who just wants to be inspired. And so
Yeah.
if people out there want to listen to some tales of some really great people, my website is www.quadcast.org, and I have about 83 episodes in the books, and so we're hoping to get many more. I reach out for folks, and sometimes I don't hear back. I like to say because I'm a nobody right now. I'm recording out of my home studio, which is the corner of my bedroom. But yeah, we're hoping to get some more people on. And as I said, if you're interested in some really interesting stories and people who have had really horrible things happen to them, but they didn't also let it define them. They've gone on to do amazing things. It's out there. I'm on Spotify and Apple and iTunes and all of that stuff. So
Great. And you're also on Instagram.
I'm on Instagram. Yep. I'm on Facebook, and I really don't know what I'm doing, but, being like yourselves, they didn't have this sort of stuff when we were growing up, right? We're
Well,
lucky
Ashley gives a little different time frame, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
Yeah.
think
but it's
MySpace
true.
came along when I was in middle school, and then I think we had Facebook by high school. So
Okay.
I did almost grow up with social media. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Right,
when
thank
I grew
God
up, we
for
didn't
it.
have electricity, so that ages me. And so, yeah, so we're figuring some things out.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, John. God bless you. And thanks for sharing your story today.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. And I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts. And it's always nice, as I said, to be on the other side of the microphone for a change. But I really appreciate the opportunity, and I love what you do here. It's a great message that we need more of out in the world. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.